action today. 40 jurors have been asked to return for questioning. Wednesday, a prosecutor spent much of the afternoon asking potential jurors about their firearm use, experience with neighborhood watch programs, how people are judged by their clothing, and racial bias. In our continuing coverage of the killing of Trayvon Martin, the trial of George Zimmerman, Arise News contributor Leila McDowell examines how the subject of race may affect the trial.
Justice for Trayvon! Justice for Trayvon!
The killing of Trayvon Martin has brought to the surface an often hidden conversation about race in America. Many have made comparisons to the murder of Emmett Till, a young black teen savagely beaten to death in the 50s. Others compared the racial divide around the Martin case to that of the trials of O.J. Simpson and the police accused of beating Rodney King.
I could be the next Trayvon Martin. I'm asking you to fight to prevent young black males like me from becoming the victims of not just racist attitudes, but racist policies.
A furor erupted when Sanford police decided not to initially arrest George Zimmerman, a decision based on Florida's Stand Your Ground law that allows deadly force if someone feels reasonably threatened.
Now you talk about a civilian with a record of attacking law enforcement who appoints himself as a neighborhood watchman can shoot somebody and not even get arrested. Enough is enough.
When the 911 tape of Zimmerman was released, it reinforced for many that Trayvon Martin was a victim of racial profiling.
He's got his hand in his waistband. And he's a black male.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
If you know justice, if you know justice, peace, you know peace.
In American communities of color, the case exposed a deep sense of racial injustice and fear. Many black parents expressed concerns that their sons could end up like Trayvon Martin under similar circumstances. There may be some truth in those fears. The ACLU found that in New York, 84% of those that are stopped in the stop and frisk policy are young men of color, even though they're only 30% of the population. Blacks are 4 to 6 times more likely than whites to be arrested for marijuana, even though usage is the same. The University of Nebraska found that the ratio of blacks to whites being shot and killed by police is 10 to 1.
30 blacks have been killed this year. 30 at the hands of police and security guards. 30.
I don't know what happened because I wasn't there, but I don't think it was racially motivated.
But on the other side of the shooting's aftermath is another kind of fear by whites who may be still afraid of blacks in America or of being labeled as racist for having that fear.
We don't know what happened from the time George got out of his vehicle and the time that the gun went off. But I can tell you, race had nothing to do with it.
In the weeks and months since the shooting, polls about what happened that night have largely been divided along racial lines. Robert Zimmerman has been outspoken in claiming that his brother is the target of so-called race baiters. Nonetheless, charges of racism have dogged the family. In March, brother Robert apologized for 2 racist tweets.
I realize those were controversial and offensive, and I did publicly apologize for them. I don't think it was the right thing to do that way.
This week, Zimmerman's father's new book left little doubt that race will continue to be an overarching issue. He writes that African Americans are the true racists, singling out Trayvon Martin's parents' attorneys and organizations from the National Basketball Association and United Negro College Fund to the NAACP. He labels the Congressional Black Caucus a pathetic, self-serving group of racists and states that President Obama sought to exploit his son's case to gain advantage in the African-American community. Leila McDowell, Arise News, Washington.
Of the 40 potential jurors still being questioned, here's the racial makeup of them. 27 are white, 7 are black, 3 are Hispanic, and 3 describe themselves as mixed race. To discuss race in the Zimmerman trial, our international law professor, Jeremy Levitt of the Florida A&M College of Law, who's written books about race. Good to see you there. And also right here in our studio is Professor Mark Lamont Hill, teaches political science at Columbia University. Welcome to both of you gentlemen. Appreciate you joining this discussion. Mark, let me just start with you right here. and Jeremy, do feel free to jump in. Prosecution is going to make this case about race. The defense is going to try to neutralize the issue of race. Which one's going to have the harder task?
The harder task is going to be the people trying to neutralize race, because this entire public conversation has been shot through with race. Even people who think George Zimmerman is correct are doing so by appealing to our racial fears. They're saying this kid in a hoodie in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time was doing the wrong thing, and therefore any good-fearing, God-fearing American, that means white people, would be okay shooting this kid. I mean, that's what they want you to believe. So even implicitly, they're talking about race. So now to tell jurors that race doesn't matter, that race talk should be avoided, it's going to be a tough job.
Yeah, and Mark makes a very good point, Jeremy. You know, it's been quoted, or Zimmerman has been quoting to say he thought he saw someone that he didn't recognize that was, quote, up to no good. How could that be about anything but race?
I think that if there's any case in the American judiciary today that speaks to race, it's this case. And what's interesting is it takes us away from the typical binary discussion of black-white relations into a discussion about Latino attitudes toward African Americans as well. This is a discussion that the far left rarely likes to have because it impugns.
Have we lost you, Jeremy? Are you still there? Well, let me ask you this.
He's speaking to a really important point there, right? Which is that the Latino dimension is also being used oftentimes by people defending George Zimmerman again, saying, this isn't a white racist, this is a Latino, so he can't be racist. That ignores the fact that, one, Latino is an ethnicity, not a race, and George Zimmerman identifies as a white Hispanic. That means that in many ways, he still identifies as white, still was able to identify himself as having a superior level of citizenship over Trayvon Martin, such that he can say, you're in the wrong neighborhood, and I have the right to self-deputize and punish you and patrol you and surveil you. That's dangerous. And that speaks to the fact that, while, yeah, he's Hispanic, but he's very much still white.
Yeah, and the truth is he's multi-ethnic. His father is white, his mother is Peruvian, as I remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he identifies himself as Hispanic. But what difference does it make how the jurors perceive them, whether they perceive him as Hispanic or as white?
No, it's super important. If they perceive him as Hispanic, then they might be able to play into their own internalized logic, right? Because, you know, Jesse Jackson said a long time ago that sometimes he feels uneasy walking down a dark street and turning around and seeing a 15-year-old black man. So internally, we understand what that means. If you see a white person saying that, if they read George Zimmerman as a white person saying that, they read it as racist, and therefore they think that he may have overreacted. So it's really important for prosecution to convince them that George Zimmerman is Latino, but it's not going to happen. You know why? Because his brother is saying so many things that speak to white racism and not Hispanic anxiety.
Not just his brother, but his father, who just published that ebook. I want to refer to a potential female juror earlier this week. In week one, potential female juror candidly answered one of the questions about race. I want to play a little bit of what she said, and then we'll move on. And then, Dick, be sure and tell me if we get Jeremy back. Let's take a listen to this.
I am older, obviously, and I have lived through the race riots of the 60s and subsequent riots with the Rodney King thing. I mean, it just makes me uncomfortable. Sure. And I don't know, you know. Sure. It's just that I wish that kind of thing didn't particularly happen, and that people could
Would you hold it? I'm sorry, I interrupted.
And that people could get along better, that it wasn't racially divided at this point in my life.
I believe we have Jeremy back as well. Jeremy, do jump in. It's so interesting. She almost sounds like Rodney King. Remember that bite? I just wish we could all get along.
Yeah.
She has an emotional reaction based on the history that she remembers in this country. How will that affect our jurors? Let me go to Jeremy first.
Well, what I was saying before is that this case really, it goes to the heart of the question of race in the American judiciary and race in society. And it allows us to have the opportunity to discuss Black-Latino relations, because the attitudinal data shows that Latino views of African Americans are just as bigoted as views of white Americans when it comes to this. In fact, the ratios almost pair up unilaterally. They almost pair up exactly together. And so in this question, I think there's an attempt to distance the Latino identity of Zimmerman from the broader discussion here. And I think we need to look at that more carefully.
Indeed. Another thing to consider here is just the geographic location of this trial, where it is. It's in the South, in Florida as well. And, there are two narratives here. There is one was killed by virulent white racists, that the killer was the victim was killed by a virulent white racist. The other is that a part Hispanic neighborhood watchman insists that he was viciously attacked. Those are two very different narratives. I wonder which one will take traction given where this trial is and where the incident happened?
Absolutely. Well, two things. One, I hope that once the evidence is laid out and you subject the story to some scrutiny, that latter story won't hold up because too many pieces contradict that, right? He wasn't just a neighborhood watchman. He was a self-appointed neighborhood watchman who was told not to pursue, who pursued anyway, who had a history of attacking law enforcement. There's so many things that actually challenge that dominant narrative. But if you take that aside and just look at location, they have a tough road because you're in the South, as you said. You're also in Florida, which has a high number of conservative Hispanics who, as the professor said, have a very particular view of black folk, which lines up with white folk. So when you have all those things it get stacked against you, the only thing you have on your side are the facts, and unfortunately, the facts don't always win, particularly when black people are the victims.
Yeah, and in this case, no one actually saw what happened. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, what I was going to say, Sanford is 15 minutes from my house. I can get on the expressway, the 4, and I'm there in 15 minutes. And let me tell you, being from Los Angeles, living here in Florida, I can tell you that the issue of race is as significant here as it is in Mississippi and Alabama. And, you know, looking at the comments of Zimmerman's father, it's very clear that the coconut doesn't fall very far from the tree. In this case, it's a very interesting coconut, because when the Latino community looks at Zimmerman, it's not clear that they embrace him, which means that when you cut a coconut open, you got white on the inside and you got brown on the outside. And the question is, which George Zimmerman are we looking at? How was he raised? What are the attitudes? If you look at the comments of his brother, it's very clear that race is a problem in that family. And here, I think he provoked a conflict that led to the killing of Trayvon Martin. And, you know, this is why the prosecutor has levied second-degree murder charges on him. Whether it was premeditated or not is a question I think is still subject to debate. I think they'd have trouble proving that issue. But this is going to open up in the United States a debate, a discussion, and I think it's important. Where are the whites and the Latinos protesting against the killing of Trayvon Martin? I don't see any of them.
And you raised a very interesting subject here, Jeremy. Of course, you know, this is very, very provocative, and we will all wait to hear a verdict. And I wonder what the likelihood there is that we might see unrest and even riots like we've seen after other controversy, particularly racially charged trials.
Yeah, well, you know what? I don't think there will be the racial explosion of this case if the ruling doesn't go in the way that justice should dictate. But needless to say, this is going to create a backlash in multiple areas. And I don't think we've even seen the beginning of this. You know, there's a bigger issue here that Professor Hill can speak to, which is this discussion about Latinos playing a larger role in the American body politic in 2016. And I'm going to tell you what, I haven't seen Marco Rubio speak on this issue. I haven't seen any of the white Latinos take this issue on seriously. And if they don't, the kind of support that they think that they might have in the next election is going to be very suspect. Trust me on that.
We're going to have to leave the discussion right there. Mark Lamont Hill, thank you so much for being